Hi, Founder fans, Jason here, and today's founder is James Lovell. And to help us learn about James Lovell, we have author Jean O'Connor here to speak with us. Jean, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Jason, for having me.
It was absolutely my pleasure. So, James Lovell is the subject of your novel. Please tell me what it is about James Lovell that struck you as interesting enough to focus on.
Well, I was a teacher for many years, and at one point, my district offered me the opportunity to have a sabbatical. But what do I study, right? So I thought about my grandmother's journal, and she copied down a journal that her grandparents wrote in 1892 that told, among many other stories, a little bit of the story of the Lovells. And that included Master John Lovell, who was the master at the Boston Latin School before the Revolution, and then his son James, who taught with him together in the same big room, big square room. And according to the journal, they argued because Master Lovell was a Tory and his son became a patriot and actually joined the Sons of Liberty, although that's not in the journal. So I wondered, well, what was that like? How would it be? Because I am, as a teacher, I'm well aware of the conflicts that can happen when people are teaching, and likewise how people can get along.
Right.
And they must have had quite the time, during those years of protests against the Stamp Act and people, burning down the house or destroying the house of Governor Hutchinson and tar and feathering and lots of other things, right? Well, then the journal doesn't fill in very many details. But the next thing it says is that when General Howe evacuated Boston, taking with him, as we know, all the loyalists and all the soldiers and everybody to Halifax, he took James Lovell, who by that time was a prisoner and had been arrested on suspicion of spying,
Right.
and John Lovell, Master John Lovell, and his family, his immediate family, on a ship. And the journal uses kind of quaint language to explain this. It says that Master Lovell is and his family are treated as the guests of England, whereas James is kept in the hold of the ship as a foul prisoner. So I wondered about all that. I wondered about the story. And so that's what I decided to learn about. So in my sabbatical, I went back to Boston and I got to go to some wonderful research centers like the Massachusetts Historical Society and the Harvard Archives and the Harvard Houghton Library and many others. And then I went up to Halifax because,
Oh,
I mean, he was in a jail. Where was this jail, right? What was
right.
it like? And of course, it didn't exist anymore, but I found out through some tips that people at the Nova Scotia Archives gave me where it was located. It was on Hollis Street, which was just a couple blocks from the water. And in a book they suggested that I look in, I found in the back an appendix which told all about how um, they had taken an old house, the British had, and transformed it into a jail. And that's where the prisoners who were taken from Boston, those that had rebelled against the British, were kept. And interestingly enough, I learned that James Lovell made a really good friend of Ethan Allen of the Green Mountain Boys, who, of course, we know is a big figure in Revolutionary history.
Right.
And then, of course, I had to answer more and more questions. So I came back with all this information and I kind of, started to pull it together. And I found a few more interesting bits. I'd been able to go to Cornell, where there was more primary source research. And I was able to go to the Library of Congress, where there was more primary source research.
Right.
And I just really had starting to get a handle on this whole story, which was as yet untold. And one of the things that I found was that the Clements Library in Ann Arbor, Michigan, has marvelous Revolutionary War resources. I wasn't able to go there, but they helped me and they sent me letters and other things that were really, really helpful to me.
Yeah, well, it sounds like
So I
you
started,
traveled a
yeah,
lot.
yeah. That was a lot,
Can't make
wasn't
it in
it?
Michigan, but you sounds like you went to several places. Had a nice
I
little
did.
journey there,
I
a
did.
James Lovell journey.
Yeah. Yeah. All about, and discovering the story of James Lovell, which
Yeah.
became very interesting.
So
I also, at that point, realized that James Lovell was like my fifth times back great grandfather.
oh,
So that was interesting too,
well,
to
is
know
that
that.
through the same grandma that was writing the journal?
Yeah, but her maiden name was Loring, but actually, James's granddaughter is named Mary Middleton Lovell Loring. And so, we all knew that forever. So it was interesting to find that that's how it traced back.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's fascinating. Well, so let me ask you about Lovell himself. So you had
Yeah.
mentioned his father was a loyalist, and I like to reference on this channel a lot how the revolution was in fact a civil war where it was
Absolutely.
literally family members. But you said he's actually taken prisoner. I believe it's after Bunker Hill. He's
Yes, after
swept up.
Bunker Hill. Very good. Yeah. James, in his efforts to help the Patriots, he and his family watched Bunker Hill from the rooftop of their house. Watched the waves of red going up the hill, watched the smoke, watched Charleston burn and the whole thing. But they didn't, or excuse me, Cambridge, not Charleston. My bad.
That's
um,
okay.
he didn't know what to do, and he wasn't a soldier, and he couldn't go help fight. But the Boston Latin School had closed down after Lexington and Concord. So what he decided to do, I believe, was to do some spying, to check up on the British that were there in the town, look at the numbers of them, look at their boats, look at what they were doing, and report. Now, here's where, when you're writing fiction, sometimes you just have to, put a little bit in there that makes it more interesting and more believable. And we don't know exactly how James Lovell conveyed his messages to the Patriots. We know he did, because after Bunker Hill, Dr. Joseph Warren, who was the Citizen General there, was killed, of course, and sadly. And in his pocket, they discovered letters that were written by James Lovell. And so that's why he was arrested
And that's how he
very
was
shortly
outed. They
after
found it on the
Bunker
body
Hill.
of
Yeah,
Dr. Warren.
yeah,
That's amazing. So
yeah.
Lovell goes to the prison, and if my mind serves me right, he spends about a year and a half, if I'm not mistaken. He actually finds
That's
out
right.
about independence while a prisoner in Canada.
That's right. And he would have found out about independence while he was in Canada. He was 9 months in the Boston Stone Jail, then 9 more months in Halifax. And I'm sure it must have just been a wonderful surprise to him that they did declare independence. I'm sure he was thrilled. And he and his fellow jailmates were, hoping they would get released. And frequently, all throughout this whole time in prison, he wrote letters to General Washington and anybody else that he thought might help him. And eventually, Washington does arrange for an exchange with him. And he is sent back on a ship along with most of the other prisoners to New York. And there he is released. He goes back to Boston, and he ends up very shortly after he's home, like several weeks, being asked to join the Second Continental Congress.
Right.
So, yeah, so in early January, he rides out of Boston with John Adams, and they go at that time to Baltimore, which is where the Congress was. So I will tell you that
Very
that is what
interesting.
I'm researching now.
Yeah, very interesting because they were only in Baltimore. Congress was only in Baltimore for what, like 2 months, maybe? If
Yeah,
yeah,
about that. They left Philadelphia. It was thought to be too dangerous. And then they went, because the British were nearby in New York. and so they went to Baltimore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
real quick, and then they went back, and then the British came again, and they fled again.
Yeah, right. Right.
That's
Right.
very interesting. And what I found really interesting about what you said is that he was exchanged for an officer, despite not being actually a member of the military, which is fairly unique. Usually, it would be an officer for an officer.
Right. You're right. They usually would do that, but in this case, early on, as James Lovell is writing to General Washington, he gets to the um, approval of the general to, and this was early while they were still, around Boston, to have him exchanged for Colonel Philip Skane of Skanes, Skanesbury, I think, outside of Fort Ticonderoga.
Oh, Skeensboro. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I
and
live in upstate New York, so I'm familiar with the
yeah,
geography.
right, New York, right. And interestingly enough, Ethan Allen, who is in jail in Halifax with Lovell, is part of that story having to do with Colonel Phillips game because he ends up he's the one that took the cannon originally from the fort, and he has a conflict with Skanes, who is eventually arrested. But anyway, he goes and he ends up Ethan Allen delivers or puts the cannon where Benedict Arnold and Henry Knox can get the cannon and take them to Boston. So that's part of the story of the deliverance, as it were, of Boston
Right.
from the
Yeah.
British.
Definitely. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Thank you so much. So Lowell, as we said, goes to the Continental Congress, and he's there for several years. If I'm again, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not don't know as much about Lowell as you, but I believe he's there until the 1780s.
right. He's there for 5 years,
Right.
longer than anyone else he serves, and that part of his story is very interesting. I'm working on researching and writing about that. He is the secretary for the Committee for Foreign Affairs. And in that role, he interviews almost all the French and other people that come over offering their services. So he meets Lafayette and everybody else, and he has to form an opinion about them all based in part on their ability to speak English
That
and
makes a lot of sense.
or at least their ability to get better at it.
Right.
Yeah, and then offer that opinion to Congress in the form of a report.
Right. And he
So,
would have also. I'm sorry.
yeah, and then he's also a cryptographer.
Very
So,
interesting. Well, I was going to ask because that would have put him in correspondence with Ben Franklin and Silas Dean and Arthur Lee.
absolutely, he
So
he writes to all those people
so that's why
all
he
the time.
uses the cryptography. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
well, yes, he tries to teach them his style of cryptography, and sometimes he has luck, and sometimes not so much. And I think perhaps he was one of these people whose mind sometimes goes faster than their words can convey. So he ends up being kind of a flop when it comes to teaching Ben Franklin and John Adams his polynumeric style of cryptography. That doesn't mean he wasn't able to decipher. He was able to decipher what letters were intercepted by the British that were handed to him by people like Nathaniel Greene and others. And when at the end Cornwallis is stuck there in Yorktown, they do find in a very interesting way a letter that he wrote to Clinton, and it helps them understand what position Cornwallis is in. So if you go to the small but really neat National Cryptologic Museum near NSA in near
In
DC,
Washington, yeah.
you can see a whole wall devoted to what James Lovell did during the siege at Yorktown.
That's amazing. I had no idea about that.
Yeah.
Well, Founder fans, you guys have to go check it out. We'll do a big field trip once the world gets out of the house.
Right.
Amazing. So, is there anything about James Lovell, after the war? What does he end up doing after the war?
Well, he goes back home after the 5 years he spends. One reason he does not go home during that time, because it was very common for congressmen to go home, take leaves, 5 months, 6 months. I think I need to go home, check on things.
Right.
My family needs help. I don't feel so good. I need a rest, whatever. They would go home.
And not
But
come back.
Lovell didn't, in part because he was supporting a very large family. He had 9 children at home. Well, by then, one or two were out of the home, but still,
Sure.
9 children is a lot to take care of.
I can
And
imagine.
his wife was, I'm just sure she was wonderful. She took care of the family all these months that he was gone in prison. And then imagine, here he comes back again, and he tells her, within a few weeks, I have to go. I have to, leave now again for who knows how long. How would she feel? She must have felt terrible.
Right.
But she did it, and she let him go, and I don't think she argued too much, because she knew how important it was that
Right.
he helped the country.
Desperate times. Right.
Yes, absolutely. And she cooked for Dr. Gardner in Boston. Um, to what extent, I'm not sure, but I'm sure that helped her and her family. And at one point, she lived with them because British officers took over their home.
Right.
So, she did quite well, I think. And I think that, her standing up for her family and doing what was important was great.
Well, Gene, your conversation today was great. Thank you so much for coming and educating us on James Lovell.
Thank you, and I hope you enjoy reading The Remarkable Cause, a novel of James Lovell and the Crucible of the Revolution.
Well, I thank you for pointing that. I was just about to bring that up. Right here it is. Everyone, thank you so much to Gene O'Connor for coming and talking to us today. Thank you for watching. Misfit TJ, I see you guys commenting. Thank you for your support. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. And there is a link in the description below. Go out and buy this book. You are definitely going to love it. And I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.